The lawyer's pen hovered over the guardianship papers as three adult children leaned forward in their chairs, eager to sign away their parents' freedom. "Once these are filed with the court," Attorney Mitchell Garrison said slowly, his eyes moving from one face to another, studying the expressions before him with the practiced assessment of someone who'd handled hundreds of family disputes, "your parents will have no legal right to manage their own affairs. You understand this is permanent. Once guardianship is granted, reversing it requires proving competency in court, which is extraordinarily difficult." Daniel Bennett, the eldest at 52, didn't hesitate for even a moment. "Our parents are clearly incompetent. They're living in that falling-apart house with a roof that leaks, refusing reasonable medical care, hoarding who knows what in all those rooms. It's for their own good. We're trying to protect them from themselves." His sister Claire nodded vigorously. Her designer handbag, a Prada that cost more than her parents spent on groceries in 6 months, sitting prominently on the conference table. "We've been patient long enough. We've tried reasoning with them, we've tried gentle persuasion, we've tried everything. The nursing home has a room ready, shared accommodation, but it's clean and safe. We can have them moved by Friday if we move quickly on this." The youngest, Marcus, shifted uncomfortably in his leather chair but said nothing. He'd learned long ago, through childhood and adolescence and into adulthood, that arguing with his siblings was pointless. Daniel and Claire had always been united in their certainties, and he had always been the odd one out, the one who saw things differently but lacked the courage to voice his objections. What none of them knew, what they couldn't have imagined, was that at that exact moment, their parents, Harold and Lila Bennett, were sitting in a different lawyer's office across town, signing documents of their own. Documents that would change everything. 3 days earlier, on a Tuesday morning that had started like any other, Harold and Lila had been having breakfast in the kitchen of the modest 3-bedroom home they'd occupied for 47 years. At 81 and 79 respectively, they moved slower than they once had, Harold's arthritic knees making stairs an adventure, and Lila's hands sometimes struggling with jar lids and tight buttons. But their minds remained sharp as the morning coffee Lila brewed each day at precisely 6:30, strong and black the way Harold had drunk it since his Navy days. "They're coming again today," Harold said, reading the text message from Daniel that had arrived while they were still in bed. "Says it's urgent. Says we need to face reality about our situation." Those are his exact words, "face reality." Lila set down her toast with strawberry preserves, homemade from berries she'd picked last summer with their granddaughter Emma, and sighed heavily. The visits from their children had become increasingly aggressive over the past 6 months, escalating from occasional check-ins to weekly interrogations. What had started as concern, legitimate worry about elderly parents living in a house that was admittedly showing its age, had evolved into something that felt more like a hostile corporate takeover. "They think we're senile," she said quietly, stirring her tea with the spoon that had been a wedding gift from Harold's mother nearly 60 years ago. "Daniel keeps talking to us like we're small children who can't understand basic concepts. Claire keeps accidentally leaving brochures for assisted living facilities on the kitchen counter, marked up with notes about which ones have availability. Even Marcus, sweet as he tries to be, keeps asking if we're managing okay in a tone that suggests he's already certain we're not." Harold reached across the worn wooden table, the same table where they'd fed 3 children through thousands of meals, where homework had been completed and family discussions held, to take her hand. His grip was still firm despite the arthritis that made mornings difficult and cold weather painful. "They don't understand. They can't see past the surface. They see the peeling paint on the porch and the old furniture and the roof that needs replacing, and they think we're struggling, that we're in denial about our capabilities. They don't see what we see." What Harold and Lila saw when they looked at their home was an archive of a life well lived. They saw the height marks on the kitchen door frame, tracking 3 children's growth from toddlers to teenagers. They saw the garden where Lila had taught those same children to plant vegetables and understand the patience required to nurture growing things. They saw the workshop in the garage where Harold had built their toys and furniture, where he'd taught Daniel and Marcus basic carpentry, where he still spent hours creating birdhouses for the local Audubon Society. They saw independence and dignity and a life they'd built deliberately, carefully, with purpose and intention. They saw memories in every corner, every piece of furniture, every worn spot on the hardwood floors. What their children saw was a liability, an inconvenience, an outdated way of living that didn't match their modern expectations. And, though neither Harold nor Lila wanted to acknowledge it directly, though it pained them to even think it about their own children, they suspected their offspring saw a potential inheritance being squandered on daily living expenses, when it could be preserved in a nursing home where costs were predictable and the estate could be protected. When Daniel, Claire, and Marcus arrived that Tuesday afternoon, Daniel in his BMW, Claire in her Mercedes, Marcus in his sensible Honda, the conversation followed a familiar and increasingly frustrating pattern. They walked through the house like property inspectors, pointing out problems with an air of vindication, cataloging what they saw as evidence of decline. "Look at this," Daniel said, gesturing at the water stain on the dining room ceiling from a roof leak that had occurred during last month's heavy rains. "This is exactly what we're talking about. You can't maintain this place anymore. What if that ceiling collapses? What if you're sitting right here when it happens?" "We've arranged for a roofer to come next week," Harold replied calmly, his voice steady despite his rising frustration. "Same company we've used for 20 years. Frank Morrison. He was Dad's age when Dad passed, now his son runs the business. They know this house inside and out." "That's not the point, Dad." Claire's voice had that sharp edge that meant her patience, never particularly abundant, was exhausted. "The point is, you shouldn't have to deal with roofers and contractors at your age. You should be somewhere with staff, with medical care on site 24 hours a day, with activities and social opportunities organized for you." "We have social opportunities," Lila interjected, her teacher's voice, she'd taught 4th grade for 38 years, still commanding attention when she chose to use it. "We have book club on Tuesdays at the library, where I'm currently leading a discussion on contemporary American literature. We volunteer at the food bank on Thursdays, have for 15 years. We attend church on Sundays, sing in the choir even. Harold plays chess in the park every Saturday morning with his friends from the Veterans Association." "That's all going to have to stop anyway," Marcus said, speaking for the first time since they'd arrived. When his parents looked at him in surprise, Marcus usually stayed silent during these confrontations. He flushed red, but continued, "I mean, eventually. You can't keep up this pace forever. Better to transition now while you can adjust than wait for a crisis." After they left, having accomplished nothing except raising Harold and Lila's blood pressure and leaving everyone feeling angry and misunderstood, the elderly couple sat in their living room in heavy silence. The afternoon sun slanted through the lace curtains Lila had hung 30 years ago, casting familiar patterns on the floor. "They're planning something," Harold said, finally, breaking the silence. "Did you notice how Daniel kept asking about our doctors, our medications, whether we'd paid our bills on time? He was taking notes on his phone when he thought we weren't looking." Lila had noticed. She'd also noticed Claire photographing the water stain, making a video of the basement stairs while commenting on how steep and dangerous they were, Marcus making notes on his phone about what he called safety concerns. They were building a case, documenting what they clearly saw as evidence of incompetence. That night, unable to sleep, her mind racing with worry and a growing sense of urgency, Lila called her oldest friend, Dorothy Washington. Dorothy lived in the next county over now, but they'd been close since meeting in nursing school in 1962. Dorothy had faced a similar situation with her own children 5 years earlier, and Lila needed her wisdom. The conversation lasted 2 hours, with Dorothy sharing the painful details of her own experience. "My children had me declared incompetent before I even knew what was happening," Dorothy explained, her voice still carrying the hurt of that betrayal. They found a doctor who barely examined me, who spent 15 minutes asking questions designed to make me look confused. They presented evidence of my house being messy. It wasn't messy, I'm just not as fastidious as I used to be, and boom, I had a guardian appointed. I spent 8 months in a facility I hated, sleeping in a room with a stranger who snored, eating food I didn't choose, following a schedule I had no say in. I couldn't even decide what time to go to bed. "How did you get out?" Leela asked, her heart pounding. I fought, got a legal aid attorney, demanded a new competency evaluation, proved I could manage my own affairs. But it was 8 months of hell, Leela. 8 months I'll never get back. Don't wait until it's too late. Protect yourself now, while you still can, while you have all your faculties and can make your own decisions. Dorothy gave Leela the name of an attorney who specialized in elder law, a woman named Sarah Chen, who would help Dorothy regain her freedom. "Call her tomorrow," Dorothy urged. "Don't wait. Your children sound like mine. They think they know what's best, and they're not going to let little things like your wishes or your rights get in the way." The next morning, first thing after breakfast, Leela called the number Dorothy had given her. The receptionist fit them in for an appointment that afternoon, sensing the urgency in Leela's voice. Sarah Chen's office was on the 3rd floor of a converted Victorian house in the historic district, warm and welcoming rather than sterile and corporate. The waiting room was filled with family photos and children's drawings, Sarah's 3 kids, the receptionist explained, that suggested the attorney understood the importance of family, even when dealing with its complications and conflicts. Sarah herself was in her mid-40s, wearing a practical suit and comfortable shoes, her hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail. She had warm eyes but a direct manner that put Harold and Leela immediately at ease. This was someone who wouldn't waste their time with platitudes or false reassurances. She listened without interruption for 45 minutes as Harold and Leela explained their situation, the increasing pressure from their children, the not-so-subtle threats, the inspections of their home, the clear implication that their children were preparing to take control of their lives whether they wanted it or not. "Are you of sound mind?" Sarah asked bluntly when they finished, her eyes moving between them. "Because that's what they'll challenge in court. They'll claim you're incompetent, that you can't manage your own affairs, that you're a danger to yourselves. They'll find a doctor who'll testify that you showed signs of confusion. They'll present the water stain and the old furniture as evidence of neglect. They'll paint a picture of 2 elderly people in decline who can't see their own deterioration." "We're perfectly competent," Leela said firmly, meeting Sarah's eyes without wavering. "We pay our bills on time, have never been late on a payment in our lives. We manage our medications without assistance. We make our own medical appointments and keep them. We choose to live simply, choose to spend our money on experiences rather than new furniture, but that's not the same as being unable to care for ourselves." Harold nodded agreement. "I still do all our home repairs that don't require a specialist. I maintain our car, manage our investments, handle our taxes. We're not incompetent. We're just old, and our children seem to think that's the same thing." Sarah nodded slowly, making notes on a legal pad. "Then here's what I recommend. We create a comprehensive legal framework to protect your autonomy. First, an irrevocable trust for your major assets, particularly your home, with specific instructions that it cannot be sold while either of you is alive without your explicit consent. Second, advance directives that explicitly state your wishes regarding living situations and medical care. Third, durable powers of attorney for both healthcare and finances assigned to someone you trust, someone who isn't your children, given the current situation. Over the next 2 days, working with an intensity born of urgency and decades of professional experience, Sarah worked with Harold and Leela to create a comprehensive legal framework that would protect their autonomy and their right to make their own decisions. They transferred their house into an irrevocable trust with specific instructions that it could not be sold while either of them was alive without their explicit consent, witnessed by 2 independent parties. They established advance directives that clearly stated their wishes regarding living situations. They wanted to remain in their home with in-home care if needed, not be placed in a facility unless absolutely medically necessary as determined by their own physicians, not by family members with potential conflicts of interest. They named Dorothy Washington as their healthcare proxy, along with their longtime friend and neighbor Robert Chen, no relation to Sarah, though the coincidence amused everyone. They appointed their accountant of 20 years, Thomas Wright, as financial power of attorney, with strict instructions that any major financial decisions had to be approved by both Harold and Lila, unless they were medically incapacitated as certified by 2 independent physicians. And they did one more thing, something Sarah suggested as what she carefully called a reality check for their children. Your children are motivated by what they see as practicality, Sarah explained, choosing her words carefully to stay within ethical boundaries. They think you're sitting on substantial assets that are being wasted on maintaining an old house. They probably imagine a significant inheritance that's being depleted. I've seen this pattern many times. Adult children suddenly becoming deeply concerned about elderly parents, not primarily out of love, but out of fear that their expected inheritance is disappearing. She paused, letting that sink in. So let's show them the reality of your financial situation. Let's show them exactly what they're fighting over. Sometimes, when people realize there's no pot of gold at the end of this particular rainbow, their urgent concerns about your welfare become much less urgent. Harold and Lila looked at each other, a lifetime of marriage allowing them to communicate without words. Then Lila nodded. Do it. Let them see the truth. Harold and Lila authorized Sarah to prepare a complete financial disclosure, reviewed by their accountant to ensure accuracy. The truth of their situation was simple and sobering. They lived on Harold's modest Navy pension and their Social Security benefits, which together provided about $3,800 per month. They owned their home free and clear and had approximately $48,000 in savings accumulated over decades of frugal living. The house, according to a recent appraisal Sarah had ordered, was worth perhaps $200,000 in the current market, maybe slightly less given its age and condition. After funeral expenses and the costs of end-of-life care, even with their Medicare and supplemental insurance, there would be significant out-of-pocket costs. There would be precious little left to inherit, certainly not the substantial windfall their children seemed to expect. On Friday morning, the same morning that, unbeknownst to Harold and Lila, Daniel, Claire, and Marcus were meeting with Attorney Garrison to file guardianship papers, Harold and Lila invited their children to what they called a family meeting at the house. Daniel arrived with a patronizing smile, clearly thinking his parents were finally ready to see reason and accept his superior judgment. Claire brought her husband, Richard, for what she called moral support, but what felt more like intimidation. Richard was a big man who used his size to dominate rooms. Marcus came alone, looking increasingly uncomfortable with the whole situation, his conscience clearly troubling him. "Thank you for coming," Harold said formally, settling into his favorite armchair, the same one where he'd read bedtime stories to 3 children decades ago. Lila sat beside him in the matching chair, her posture straight, her expression calm and collected. "We know you've been concerned about us, and we want you to know we've heard those concerns. We appreciate that they come from a place of caring, at least in part. So we wanted to be completely transparent about our situation." He handed each of them a folder, the kind you might get at a lawyer's office. Inside was a complete financial statement, copies of the trust documents, the advance directives, the power of attorney assignments, and a letter from Sarah Chen explaining the legal framework now in place. Daniel's face went through several shades of red as he read, his jaw clenching tighter with each page. You can't do this. You can't just lock everything away where we can't access it, where we can't protect you from your own poor decisions." "We can, and we have. Leela said calmly, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd managed classrooms full of energetic 9-year-olds for nearly 4 decades. Everything is legal and properly executed. We are of sound mind, as confirmed by 2 independent physicians whose evaluations are included in your folders. We have protected our assets and our autonomy. We have planned for our care. We have made our wishes clear and legally binding. Claire was shaking her head, her voice rising in pitch and volume. This is exactly what we were worried about. Someone has obviously manipulated you into this. Some lawyer has convinced you to do things that aren't in your best interest, has played on your fears to generate legal fees. No one manipulated us, Harold interrupted firmly, his voice carrying the command he'd learned in the Navy. We made these decisions freely, competently, and with full understanding of their implications. We consulted with our accountant, with our physicians, with trusted friends. We are not incompetent. We are not helpless. We are not confused. We simply choose to live our lives on our terms, and we're protecting our right to do so. But the house is falling apart, Marcus protested weakly, gesturing around at walls that needed paint and furniture that was admittedly dated. You can barely manage the stairs. I've seen you, Dad, how you have to hold the railing and take them one at a time. What happens when one of you falls and breaks a hip? What happens when Mom can't cook anymore or you can't drive? You'll be trapped here, helpless. Then we will utilize the in-home care provisions we've arranged, Lila explained patiently, as if teaching a particularly dense student. We have long-term care insurance that will cover up to 6 years of nursing assistance if needed. We have healthcare proxies who will ensure our wishes are followed. We have medical alert systems installed. We have planned for every reasonable contingency. We're not being foolish, we're being deliberate. Except dying alone in this dump, Claire snapped, her composure finally cracking completely. That's what's going to happen. You'll fall or have a stroke and no one will find you for days. You'll lie there suffering because you're too stubborn to accept help. We have a medical alert system with automatic fall detection, Harold said, his voice taking on a hard edge. We have daily check-ins arranged with friends. Robert next door has a key and checks on us every morning. We have a signal system with the front curtains. We are not taking foolish risks. We are simply insisting on our right to age with dignity in our own home, a right that is legally protected and morally sound. The argument continued for another hour, growing increasingly heated and personal. Claire accused them of being selfish, of not considering how hard it would be for their children to manage a crisis from a distance. Daniel claimed they were living in the past, refusing to accept modern realities. Marcus mostly stayed quiet, but his face showed his distress. Finally, Richard convinced Claire to leave before things got even uglier. Daniel stormed out with barely a goodbye, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Only Marcus lingered, looking at his parents with an expression that might have been shame, might have been grief. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, his voice breaking. "I knew this wasn't right, but I didn't know how to stop it. They were so convinced, so certain that they knew what was best for you, and I was afraid to stand against them. I've never been good at that." Harold stood, his knees protesting, and embraced his youngest son. "Then, help us now. Help us show them that we're capable, that we're managing. Visit us not to inspect, but to spend time with us. See us as people, not as problems to be solved. Be our son, not our judge." Marcus nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I will. I promise. I'm so sorry I let you down." "You haven't let us down," Lila said, joining the embrace. "You're here now. That's what matters." Wait, before their fate changes forever? If this story of love and danger has already captivated you, comment which character intrigues you the most. To make sure you don't miss any unexpected twists, subscribe and join our storytelling community. The most intense chapter is about to begin. Now, back to the plot. The next week, despite everything, despite the trust documents and the medical evaluations and the clear evidence of Harold and Lila's competence, Daniel and Claire filed their guardianship petition anyway. Their attorney, Mitchell Garrison, argued that Harold and Lila had been unduly influenced by Sarah Chen and Dorothy Washington, that the lawyers and doctors had been fooled by two clever elderly people who were actually deteriorating rapidly beneath a veneer of competence. They presented the water-stained ceiling, photographs of the cluttered basement, videos of Harold struggling upstairs as evidence of inability to maintain safe living conditions. They found a gerontologist, Dr. Raymond Pierce, who ran a consulting practice that primarily served attorneys in guardianship cases, who reviewed their documentation and opined, without ever meeting Harold and Lila, that the evidence suggested possible cognitive decline and impaired decision-making capacity requiring further evaluation and protective intervention. The court hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. In the meantime, Sarah Chen suggested something unexpected, something that would use modern technology in service of traditional justice. "Let's document your daily lives," she said during a strategy meeting in her office. "Video diaries showing your routines, your decision-making processes, your social interactions. Let's show the court not just that you're competent, but that you're thriving. Let's make it impossible for them to paint you as confused, helpless victims." Harold and Lila had never used social media, had barely mastered email, and only recently figured out how to text their grandchildren. But Marcus, now fully committed to supporting his parents, helped them set up a simple video camera system and taught them how to use it. For 2 weeks, they recorded their days with meticulous attention to detail. They filmed their morning routine. Harold making coffee while listening to the news, Lila doing her stretching exercises that her physical therapist had prescribed for her arthritis. Both of them completing the New York Times crossword puzzle together, discussing clues and debating answers with sharp, clear thinking. They recorded Lila's book club meeting at the library, where she led a thoughtful discussion on Toni Morrison's Beloved, demonstrating not just competence but intellectual vitality. They filmed Harold's chess games in the park, including one where he beat a cocky 25-year-old in 15 moves, explaining his strategy clearly to the camera afterward. They documented their volunteer work at the food bank, showing how they efficiently sorted donations, interacted warmly with other volunteers and clients, managed the organizational systems they'd helped create over 15 years of service. They recorded themselves paying bills online, with Harold narrating the process, checking account balances, confirming amounts, scheduling payments, showing methodical, capable financial management. They filmed meal preparation, with Lila explaining her process of menu planning, grocery shopping within budget, cooking nutritious food. They showed themselves managing medications, with their system of weekly pill organizers that they filled together every Sunday, cross-checking the list against their prescriptions. They recorded medical appointments, with the camera sitting discreetly in the examination room with permission from their doctors, as they discussed their health, asked informed questions, made decisions about their care. They documented thoughtful discussions about current events, about family matters, about decisions they needed to make. The video showed two people who might move slowly and look old, but whose minds were sharp, whose judgment was sound, whose capacity for independent living was clear. When the guardianship hearing arrived on a cold Monday morning in November, the courtroom was tense with anticipation. Daniel and Claire had hired Mitchell Garrison, an expensive attorney who specialized in guardianship cases and had a reputation for winning. He opened with a presentation designed to paint a picture of two vulnerable elderly people living in dangerous conditions, making poor decisions, being taken advantage of by opportunistic professionals who had convinced them to spend money on legal fees rather than proper care. He presented photographs of the water-stained ceiling, the cluttered basement, the worn furniture. He played portions of videos showing Harold struggling with stairs, Lila having difficulty opening a jar. He presented Dr. Pierce's written opinion suggesting possible cognitive decline. Then, Sarah Chen presented the evidence for the defense. First came the medical evaluations from two independent geriatric specialists, both highly respected in their field, both of whom had spent hours with Harold and Lila conducting comprehensive cognitive assessments. Both concluded unequivocally that Harold and Lila were fully competent, showed no signs of dementia or significant cognitive impairment, and were capable of managing their own affairs. Then came the financial records, presented by accountant Thomas Wright, showing careful management of resources, consistent bill payment, no signs of financial exploitation or inability to handle money. Then came character testimony from friends, neighbors, and the director of the food bank where they volunteered, all describing Harold and Lila as capable, engaged, thoughtful people who were active contributors to their community. And finally, the videos. The judge, Patricia Morrison, a woman in her 60s who had built her career on careful consideration of evidence and impatience with manipulation, watched 45 minutes of Harold and Lila's daily life. She saw them laughing and thinking and engaging with the world in ways that were undeniably competent. She saw the crossword puzzle completion, the book club discussion, the chess victory, the volunteer work, the medical appointments where they asked intelligent questions and made informed decisions. When the videos ended, Judge Morrison sat in silence for a long moment. Then she looked directly at Daniel and Claire, her expression cold with an anger that was all the more powerful for being carefully controlled. "Your parents are not incompetent," she said, her voice cutting through the courtroom like a blade. "They are elderly individuals who have chosen to age in place, who have made thoughtful and comprehensive plans for their care, and who have every legal and moral right to make their own decisions. Your petition for guardianship is denied." She paused, letting that sink in. "Furthermore, I'm ordering you to pay their legal fees. This was a frivolous action motivated not by genuine concern for your parents' welfare, but by," she paused again, choosing her words with the precision of someone who knew they would be quoted, "other interests that have nothing to do with your parents' best interests and everything to do with your own." The gavel came down with finality. The blow to Daniel and Claire was not just legal but financial. Sarah Chen's fees totaled $18,400. Combined with their own attorney's costs of $15,000, the failed guardianship attempt cost them more than $33,000, more than they stood to inherit even if their parents died tomorrow. But the real cost was relational. In the months following the hearing, Harold and Lila set clear boundaries with the precision of people who had learned, painfully, that some relationships require strict management. They welcomed Marcus and his family warmly, grateful for his support and his willingness to see them as people rather than problems. Marcus visited every week, brought his children, Harold and Lila's grandchildren, to learn from their great-grandparents' wisdom. They taught the kids to garden, to play chess, to bake bread. They shared stories and laughter and the warmth of family connections that weren't based on judgment or control. But they kept Daniel and Claire at arm's length, agreeing to occasional supervised visits but making clear that trust, once broken so fundamentally, would take years to rebuild, if it could be rebuilt at all. They were polite but distant, cordial but not warm. What surprised everyone, including Harold and Lila themselves, was what happened 6 months after the hearing. They announced they were selling the house. Daniel's phone call was gleeful, smug, certain that his parents had finally admitted he was right all along. "I knew you couldn't maintain it," he said when he called, barely able to contain his vindication. "I'm glad you've finally seen reason." "We haven't seen your version of reason," Harold interrupted, his voice calm but firm. We've simply recognized that this house, which served us wonderfully for 47 years, no longer serves our current needs. We're making a change on our terms, Harold's and Lila's terms, not Daniel and Claire's terms. The house sold quickly for $212,000 to a young family with 2 small children who promised to love it as much as Harold and Lila had. After paying off a small reverse mortgage they'd taken out years earlier to fund some major repairs and covering selling costs, Harold and Lila netted approximately $170,000. They used $90,000 to purchase a modern, accessible 2-bedroom condominium in a thoughtfully designed senior living community called Heritage Gardens. Not the nursing home their children had selected, but an independent living facility that offered the perfect balance of autonomy and support. The community was specifically designed for active seniors who wanted independence but valued having services available. The condo was modern with wide doorways for potential wheelchair access, a walk-in shower with grab bars, an open floor plan that eliminated the stairs that had been troubling Harold's knees. The building offered optional services: a dining room for those who didn't want to cook, housekeeping for those who needed it, transportation for those who couldn't drive. Most importantly, the community offered a continuing care contract that would allow Harold and Lila to age in place with increasing levels of support as needed. If they eventually needed assisted living or skilled nursing care, they could receive it in the same community, in familiar surroundings, without the trauma of relocation. They moved in on a beautiful October morning, Marcus and his family helping them carry boxes, while Daniel and Claire watched from the parking lot, having shown up uninvited and being pointedly not asked to help. The condo cost $90,000, leaving $80,000 that Harold and Lila invested carefully in a diversified portfolio managed by their accountant. With their pensions, Social Security, and the investment income of approximately $4,000 annually, they were more financially secure than they'd been in the old house. But the real surprise, the final surprise that would define Harold and Lila's legacy, came at Christmas. Harold and Lila hosted a dinner in their new condo, inviting Marcus and his family, Dorothy, and several other friends, and, after much discussion and soul-searching, extending an invitation to Daniel and Claire that carefully noted this was an opportunity for healing but would require respect and appropriate behavior. Midway through the meal, after the turkey had been carved and everyone had eaten their fill, Harold stood and tapped his wine glass for attention, the crystal ringing clear in the suddenly quiet room. "Lila and I want to make an announcement," he said, smiling at his wife with the warmth of 60 years together. "We've been doing a lot of thinking about legacy, about what we want to leave behind when we're gone, about what matters. And we've made some decisions that we want to share with all of you." He pulled out a folder. Everyone in the family had become simultaneously wary and curious about folders, and handed copies to his 3 children, to Dorothy, to several others at the table. "We're establishing scholarships," Lila explained, her voice warm with excitement about this new chapter. 3 of them, actually. One in each of your names, Daniel, Claire, Marcus, at Riverside Community College. Each scholarship will provide full tuition for students aging out of foster care, students who have no family support, students who need a chance but have no resources to pursue it. The scholarships, she explained, would be funded by $40,000 of their remaining liquid assets. The money would be invested conservatively, with the annual returns providing ongoing scholarships in perpetuity. The other $40,000 would remain for their care and comfort, and any remainder after their deaths would go to further fund the scholarships. "But that's our inheritance," Claire said, the words escaping before she could stop them, before she could think about how they would sound in a room full of witnesses. The table went completely silent. Even Richard looked embarrassed, his face flushing red. Marcus put his head in his hands. "Your inheritance," Harold said quietly, his voice sad but firm, carrying decades of disappointment and recent revelation, "is the education we gave you. We paid for your colleges, every penny, taking out loans we spent 10 years paying off. We helped with down payments on your first homes. We supported you through career changes and divorces and every challenge you faced. We gave you everything we had to give."
And it was never enough, Lila added, her voice carrying both sadness and acceptance. We understand that now. We see clearly that no amount would ever be enough, that you would always want more, always feel entitled to more. So we're giving what remains to people who will actually appreciate it, who will use it to build better lives, who understand that opportunity is a gift, not a birthright. Marcus was crying openly, not from disappointment, but from pride. "That's beautiful," he managed through his tears. "It's exactly what you should do. It's perfect." Daniel and Claire left shortly after, angry and humiliated, their faces red with shame and fury. They didn't speak to their parents again for over a year, and when they finally did reach out, it was with stiff, formal notes that acknowledged wrongdoing without quite apologizing for it. But the scholarships proved to be a profound success that exceeded even Harold and Lila's hopes. The first recipients were announced the following fall, 3 young people aging out of foster care, all with dreams of better futures and no resources to achieve them. Harold and Lila attended the awards ceremony at the community college, met the students, heard their stories that were heartbreaking and inspiring in equal measure. One of them, a young woman named Keisha Williams, reminded Lila powerfully of herself at 18, smart, determined, frightened of the future, but too proud to show vulnerability. "I never had anyone believe in me," Keisha told Lila after the ceremony, holding the scholarship certificate like it was made of gold, like it was the most precious thing she'd ever possessed. "Everyone always said foster kids don't make it, that we're too damaged, too far behind, that we should be grateful for any opportunity, even if it's not what we want." "But you believed in me without even knowing me. You gave me a chance based on nothing but potential." Lila hugged her tightly, feeling the weight and warmth of a stranger who somehow felt like family. "We believe in possibility," she said softly. "We believe in people getting chances, in dignity, in being seen as more than our circumstances or our past." The scholarship program grew over the years in ways no one had anticipated. Other donors, inspired by Harold and Lila's example, contributed funds. The community college matched their gifts. Local businesses got involved. What had started as Harold and Lila's final surprise became a legacy that would outlive them by generations, touching hundreds of lives. As for their children, time brought some healing, though the scars never fully disappeared. Marcus remained close, visiting weekly, bringing his children to learn from their grandparents' wisdom and example. He became his parents' champion, their advocate, their friend as much as their son. Daniel eventually apologized, though it took 3 years and came only after his own daughter asked him pointed questions about why she never saw her grandparents. The relationship never fully recovered the warmth it had once had. Trust, once broken so completely, proved difficult to rebuild. Claire took the longest, finally reaching out on Harold's 87th birthday with a letter that was equal parts apology and self-justification, acknowledging her mistakes while still trying to explain them away as good intentions gone wrong. Harold and Lila granted forgiveness to both of them, because that's who they were, because they believed in second chances and the possibility of redemption. But they never forgot the lesson they'd learned, that dignity, autonomy, and the right to make one's own choices had to be fought for and protected fiercely, even from those who claimed to act out of love. Harold passed away at 91,
peacefully in his sleep in the condo he and Leela had chosen, surrounded by photographs of their life together and the scholarship recipients who had become like extended family. He died with dignity, in familiar surroundings, having lived his final decade exactly as he wished. Leela lived another 4 years, eventually requiring the assisted living services the continuing care community provided when her arthritis made independent living difficult and a small stroke affected her mobility. But she remained in the same building, moved just 2 floors up, in familiar surroundings with familiar staff. She could visit the condo where she and Harold had been so happy, could maintain her routines and her connections. She died at 94, holding Marcus's hand with photos of scholarship recipients covering her walls and flowers from Keisha, now a successful teacher and advocate, filling her room with fragrance and color. At her funeral, more than 60 former scholarship students attended, traveling from across the state to pay respects to a woman they'd never met but who had changed their lives. They told stories of opportunity seized, of dreams achieved, of the difference one elderly couple's final surprise had made in their lives. Keisha Williams, now 32 and running a nonprofit that supported foster youth transitioning to independence, delivered a eulogy that had everyone in tears. Harold and Lila Bennett believed in possibility, she said, her voice strong and clear, carrying to every corner of the church. They believed that people deserved the right to choose their own paths, to maintain their dignity, to decide how their lives would unfold. They fought for that right for themselves, against their own children, and then they extended it to dozens of young people who needed someone to believe in them.
Their children tried to put them in a home, tried to take away their choices, tried to decide what was best for them based on their own convenience and their own interests. But Harold and Lila had one final surprise. They chose differently. They chose agency over compliance, dignity over convenience, legacy over inheritance. And in doing so, they taught all of us, the scholarship recipients, yes, but really everyone who knew their story, the most important lesson of all, that we are never too old, too tired, or too limited to fight for what matters. That our worth isn't measured by our productivity or our physical ability, but by our humanity and our choices. That the best inheritance isn't money. It's the example of a life lived with purpose and dignity until the very end. Thank you, Harold and Lila, for seeing us, for believing in us, for showing us that the best revenge against those who would diminish us is to live fully, choose freely, and create something beautiful that outlasts all the petty battles. The scholarship fund continued to grow exponentially after Lila's death. It was eventually endowed with enough capital to support 6 full scholarships annually in perpetuity. A building at the community college was named Bennett Hall in their honor, with a plaque telling their story. Their example became a case study in elder law classes, taught in law schools across the country as a model of protecting autonomy and planning for dignified aging. Daniel and Claire inherited nothing except the lesson their parents had tried to teach them, that love isn't about control, that care isn't about convenience, and that the greatest legacy parents can leave isn't financial wealth, but moral example. Marcus inherited his parents' values, their commitment to seeing people as they are, rather than as problems to be solved, their fierce belief in dignity and choice.
He became an advocate for elder rights, serving on boards of organizations that fought against inappropriate guardianships and supported aging in place with dignity. And somewhere in a box of photos that had been in Lila's assisted living apartment, carefully preserved and clearly meant to be found, Marcus discovered a letter his parents had written together to be opened after they were both gone. The envelope was addressed simply, "To our children, with love and one final lesson." Inside, in Harold's careful handwriting with additions in Lila's distinctive script, was a letter that Marcus read through tears, that he later shared with his siblings, that became part of the family's history. Dear Daniel, Claire, and Marcus, if you're reading this, we're both at peace now. We hope we died with dignity, in circumstances we chose, surrounded by people we loved. We hope we didn't suffer long. We hope you remember us not just at the end, but throughout our lives. We want you to understand what we tried to show you in those difficult months before the guardianship hearing. We were never helpless. We were never incompetent. We were simply old. And you, Daniel and Claire especially, mistook that for weakness, for inability, for a problem that needed to be solved rather than a stage of life to be honored. You tried to put us in a home for your convenience, not for our welfare. You tried to take control of our lives not because we were failing, but because you were afraid. Afraid of the burden we might become, afraid of the inheritance you might lose, afraid of having to respect our choices when they didn't match your preferences. We forgive you. We truly do. We love you all, always have, always will. But we hope you've learned. We hope that when your time comes, your children treat you with the respect and dignity you eventually, grudgingly, learned to show us.
Our final surprise. The scholarships, the legal protections, the documentation of our competence wasn't about revenge. It was about teaching you, and teaching others through our example, that elderly people deserve respect, deserve choice, deserve to be seen as fully human right until the end. The money you wanted to inherit is doing more good in the world than it ever would have if we'd left it to you. It's giving chances to young people who never had them. It's creating possibility where there was only limitation. It's building futures instead of preserving the past. That's our legacy. Not the money, but the message. Dignity matters. Choice matters. Seeing people as they are, not as you wish them to be, matters. Marcus, you learned this lesson. Thank you for standing with us when it mattered. Daniel and Claire, we hope you've learned it too, even if the learning was painful. Live well. Age with grace. Fight for your right to choose. And when you die, leave behind something more valuable than money. Leave behind an example of a life lived with integrity and purpose. With love and one final lesson. Harold and Lila Bennett. Marcus framed the letter and hung it in his office, a reminder of the surprise that changed everything. Not the scholarships or the legal battle, but the simple, profound truth that his parents had been right all along. They had known what they needed, what they wanted, and what they were capable of. They had only asked to be believed, to be respected, to be allowed to make their own choices. And in the end, their final surprise wasn't about revenge or vindication or proving anyone wrong. It was about legacy, about choosing to invest in possibility rather than leaving behind wealth that would be quickly spent and forgotten. It was about two elderly people who refused to go quietly into managed care, who fought for their right to choose, and who transformed that fight into something beautiful that would outlive them by generations. The Bennett Scholarship, as it came to be formally known, continued funding students for decades. Each recipient learned the story of Harold and Lila, the elderly couple who had turned their children's attempted control into an opportunity to change lives, who had faced down a guardianship petition and used their legal victory as a launching pad for lasting good. And every year at the scholarship ceremony, someone, usually Keisha Williams, who never forgot the woman who believed in her, would toast to Harold and Lila's memory with the words that had become tradition. To Harold and Lila Bennett. To their final surprise that keeps on giving. To dignity, choice, and the power of possibility. May we all age with such grace and fight with such courage. The toast was always followed by a moment of silence and then applause that seemed to last forever. A standing ovation for two people who had proven that you're never too old to fight for what matters, never too limited to make a difference, and never too alone if you build connections based on respect rather than control. That was Harold and Lila's final surprise. Not that they had money or didn't have money, not that they won or lost legal battles,
but that they understood what truly mattered and had the courage to pursue it even when their own children stood against them.